Neighbor tells Gramps he should mind his own butternut business. That advice costs neighbor most of his yard and a car. Gramps had just moved into a retirement park with a lot that backed up to county land that was a nature preserve. His backyard was basically non-existent, but he didn't mind as he got to look out over the preserve. However, he did marvel at how his next-door neighbor's backyard extended a good 8 feet past his, giving neighbor a nice space back there. Gramps tried to be friendly with all his new neighbors, exchanging phone numbers and the like, and one day he noticed the next-door neighbor was putting down expensive pavers that extended from his back door all the way to the old fence posts that designated the preserve boundary. Gramps watched the neighbor yank the 3 rickety fence posts out of the ground and move them back an extra 2 feet into the preserve before pounding them back in, then started to clear the land, intending to gain himself more area for his pavers. Gramps used to work for the National Park Services as a young lad, so he thought he had better warn his neighbor of the consequences of his actions, so he heads out back for a little chat. Neighbor is immediately defensive, and before Gramps says much, neighbor tells him, "You're new here. I've been here 10 years and to mind your own coconut business." Gramps decides not to press the issue. Nothing happens that year, but the following year, when most of the park emptied out to head north for the summer, the county comes by to check on the preserve. Gramps notices them going back and forth behind his neighbor's house. The workers are pulling out maps and taking photos and making phone calls, and soon more guys show up. Turns out neighbor has moved the posts several times over the years, and in reality his backyard is supposed to be even smaller than Gramps' backyard. To make it worse, neighbor put pavers in the back specifically to park both his golf cart and a cherry red sports car back there for the summer, so the county will have to move them before they can do anything else. They tape a notice to the front door and leave. Gramps goes over to read it, and it states that neighbor was in violation of encroaching onto protected lands. He has 30 days to move his car, tear up the pavers and pay a fine of $11,000, because of damage to endangered species who inhabit the protected lands, as well as trespassing fees. Failure to do so within 30 days will result in golf cart and car being towed and impounded. Pavers will be dug up and carted off at neighbor's expense, and the fine will increase for every additional day past the deadline. 30 days comes and goes, so a week after that Gramps has quite the show, as first the car and cart were towed, pavers were dug up and hauled off, and the old fence posts and ropes were replaced with metal posts embedded into buried cement bases, connected by steel cables. Whole process took several weeks to finish, but the preserve looked a lot more legit when they were done. A few solar cameras were installed so the county could monitor the wildlife and encroachers remotely. Meanwhile, more notices were taped to the front door of neighbor's house. By November, the snowbirds were flooding back into the park, including neighbor. That was Gramps' second show of the summer, as neighbor reads all the notices, digging down until he reads the first one, then runs out back and starts screaming and cussing up a storm before running back to his car to dig out his cell phone so he can call the county to find out where his car and golf cart were. Gramps stays indoors to avoid the guy as he is frantically trying to unload his car, turn on his water and electricity, get the AC and the toilets going, and all the while trying to get someone at county to pick up the phone and give him some answers. He finally gets a live person and proceeds to scream at them while on speakerphone about his car and cart, so the call keeps getting kicked to other people because who wants to help a screamer? Basically, neighbor is told to come to the county office to get this straightened out. 3 days later, neighbor catches Gramps outside and asks if he was here when the county stole his car and destroyed his backyard. Gramps said he was, and neighbor says, "Well, why didn't you call me when you saw them putting notices on my door? You had my number up north." Gramps said he had thought about doing that, but figured neighbor would prefer him to mind his own butternut business, so he decided against it. Grandpa played the long con. I like it. Plus he didn't have to lift a finger to get the neighbor cited either. I'm surprised the neighbor didn't accuse your grandfather of calling whatever officials that came out. There is nothing in the world like a Gramps. Thank you for this beautiful story. It makes me miss my crotchety, old lovable Gramps.
So true. Smile. Gramps is precious and I cherish all my memories with him.
Assuming Gramps isn't the only neighbor, I'd say this guy isn't the most popular on the block.
Yeah, his behavior really stands out as everyone else has always been super friendly from the day Gramps moved in. They're all retired and mostly chill AF, that one dude just had some issues.
Don't mess with protected lands, they will butternut you up. Ever wanted to know the price of an old endangered tree? You can't afford it.
Tree law, tree law, tree law.
Long, yes, but so worth it. Adding, the ending gives new meaning to punchline. Bravo. I don't work here anymore. Hey, boss, got an opening? Worked for a medical transportation company that had a contract with Medicaid. One of their many rules was that you could not provide any assistance to the patient inside of their house. An elderly lady had an old house with a very small foyer that you had to climb 3 steps to get to the main floor. The only other entrance was around back and up 2.5 flights of rickety steps to an old deck that opened into a bedroom. Upstairs. She's in a wheelchair. Common sense says take her in the front door, up 3 stairs and she's home on the level she lives on. Medicaid says take her up the outside stairs, dump her in the bedroom upstairs and let her worry about getting down to the living room level. We ignored their policy and took her in the front door anyway. A random inspection by a random inspector showed that we were not in compliance. We appealed, the inspector came out and saw the different options and decided that we had no case for appeal. Take her up the outside stairs? Nope. From then on, when the driver arrived at her house, he would get her out of the van in the sidewalk, and then get on the radio and tell the boss to shove his stupid job. Now that he was no longer an employee, he was free to assist this lovely person into her front door and up the stairs. Once finished, they would come back to the van, tell the boss they'd reconsidered, and ask for their job back. Boss was always understanding and took them back, but very carefully noted the 10 to 15 minute break in their employment, to show that the company remained in compliance. Aftermath, we had contests to see who could have the most dramatic I quit scene. Medicaid noted our activities, but couldn't put a handle on how to stop it. Malicious compliance achieved. From a patient, thank you. This is using malicious compliance for good. 4 years ago my gallbladder went bad, but due to not having sufficient medical coverage I didn't get it looked at soon enough and developed sepsis. From there everything seemed to happen very quickly and I found myself in a coma, suffering massive organ failure as sepsis destroyed my liver and kidneys. Now for the last 4 years I've been working on rebuilding what little semblance of life I can, doing dialysis every other day, which leaves me, a former personal trainer and powerlifter, weak as a child and confined to a wheelchair. If it weren't for one of my personal heroes, Ishmael, I would be left at the step of my home in Arizona, where it's usually 100+ degrees when I come home from treatment. It breaks his transport company's rules, but he always helps me up that step and into my house so that I can do the only thing I can do, and pass out of my bed for a few hours. This is keeping me alive, but at the cost of almost keeping me dead. In the last 4 years I've suffered being left by a woman who couldn't accept, after 6 years of marriage, my new situation, the loss of my job and career and autonomy, the loss of my dignity, as I throw up almost all solid food I eat, and I'm often too weak to make it to the bathroom. Being end stage, the only thing I can really do is hope that a liver and kidney become available on the transplant list, but until then it's the kindness of people like this, that is often all I have left in this fugue state between medical technology being good enough to keep us alive, and medical technology being able to give us back a sense of quality of life. Thank you. A million times thank you. God, I hate stupid rules like that. So idiotic. And what an butternut of an inspector. At least your boss understood and played along with the malicious compliance.
Most people seem to become inspectors because they're so intent on following the letter of the law and not the spirit. Source: have dealt with home city building inspectors. It should clarify, I meant city building inspectors, the ones that give permits to buildings, and not the ones you contract with to look over homes for problems. My mistake.
You should have enacted Gone with the Wind last scene. Boss, what's going to happen to me? Employee: frankly, my dear, I don't give a coconut. Wonderful. Please do add some of those quit scenes. Very wholesome.
He was a very generous employer, but that remained, as it must, unpaid time. I can tell you that nobody suffered or objected to it. It was a true group effort.
Don't leave or you'll be toast. Rule 3, don't question the validity of the story. That is a very needy toaster. Fire guy, fire.
Ryan started the fire.
If you start having any toaster Y thoughts, you should call SCP. SCP vibes.